It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal, as former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger once said. And this seems to have been proven right, as Donald Trump, the U.S. president, reportedly asked the EU to slap tariffs of up to 100% on China and India as part of a joint effort to make Russia stop its military operations in Ukraine. Using tariffs as a bargaining chip for foreign policy is nothing new for Washington, but this latest proposal, if true, leaves Europe in a precarious position, as China is the EU's second largest trading partner, and vice versa. If the EU bows to this pressure, what could this mean for the bloc's economy, not to mention its sovereignty? What's behind the latest push by the White House? Welcome to The Point with me, Liu Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Colorado, the U.S., by Remy Pierre, senior partner of the Embelli Advisory, a political risk consultancy and investment firm. From Maryland, the U.S., by Surabh Gupta, senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist of the Institute for Chino-American Studies, and from Beijing by Li Lun, Assistant Professor of Economics at Peking University. The warmest welcome to all of you. So let's find out exactly what was said in the media reports. According to the Financial Times, on Tuesday, the U.S. president made the tariff demand during a meeting between U.S. and EU officials discussing options to increase economic pressure on Russia. The report says Donald Trump has asked the EU to impose tariffs of up to 100% on India and China as part of a joint effort to increase pressure on Russia to end its war in Ukraine, according to three officials familiar with the matter. We are ready to go right now, but we're only going to do this if our European partners step up with us, one U.S. official said. And a second U.S. official said Washington was prepared to mirror any tariffs on China and India imposed by the EU, potentially leading to a further increase in U.S. levies on imports from both countries. Now, the FT report was corroborated by a CNBC report as well. So let's dive into the discussion. Professor Li Lun, the White House has not officially responded to requests for comments, nor has the EU, nor has the Chinese side said anything officially on this piece of news. How credible are these reports? Assuming this to be true, why do you think President Donald Trump made this extraordinary demand?
Yeah, so right now I think it has been widely reported by a bunch of medias. I've seen reports by CNBC, Bloomberg, and Reuters. But I mean, the White House hasn't officially responded to comment on this issue. But right now, I think it's pretty likely that President Trump does say those words, and those are actually the news are still in progress. So we still need to see further that whether this policy is serious and what's the following up to it. So I think part of the reason why President Trump is insisting on for the EU to impose such tariffs is that in his August 2025 summit with President Putin, I think it's a much anticipated summit between the two presidents. But to this date, I don't think there's a concrete peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And I think a lot of Trump allies and Trump himself may take this as an embarrassment or even a defeat. So that's why I think he's ramped up his rhetorics towards EU for example, to put further tariff or sanction towards China and India for buying Russian oil. So I think at the back of the story, I think it's this could be part of the reason. Another part of the reason is cutting the economic ties with Russia and basically just doubling down on the sanction towards Russia. So after the Nord Stream explosion and the events that follows, Russia still can get some of the economic support from China and India. So I think this also angers President Trump and could motivate, give him the motive to do such a policy requirement.
Remy, let me go to you. Does the logic stand that by discouraging China and India from buying Russian oil, Russia will stop its military operations in Ukraine? Does it stand?
Well, if you actually look at the current situation on the conflict and the current situation of the Russian economy, especially over the last 1 or 2 months, when you've seen some reports from the Russian central bank that was more alarming than in the last couple of years, definitely the support of China or India buying Russian oil, Russian products is necessary and needed for Russia to be able to continue the conflict. The objective here from the Trump administration is to weaken the Putin's hand into the negotiations currently on the Ukrainian conflict. If Putin and his administration feel the cost of the economic cost of the war much more than it does currently, with India and China just switching a little bit their support to Putin, then definitely their capacity to continue the conflict that is costing so much to the Ukrainian people and others around, will have to weaken.
Mr. Gupta, maybe you have a different opinion. I do not know. It seems that the logic has always been that China or India have to do something in order for Russia to, stop the military operations, rather than the West. Reflecting on what it has done and what it can do, what it should do for the conflict to end. So again, they're looking at what can be done on China's side, which is a far stretch, if you ask me. Gupta, how do you look at the underlying logic behind such a potential request and whether, it can work, and besides the legality of it?
I agree with exactly everything that you just said right now. If you read that executive order which Trump put out, on the basis of which he's doing the same, he imposed those 25% sanctions on India, additional 25%. It says addressing threats to the United States from the Russian Federation. So the question one asks is, if it's from the Russian Federation, why don't you just go directly and in some way tariff, sanction, penalize the Russian Federation? So why are you bringing India in, and why are you bringing China out here? And here's the point I feel. I think the point that was made, that he is embarrassed by the fact that he has been not been able to broker the ceasefire, is a very important one. He said on day one he would do that. It's many days he's not been able to do that. But the more important point is this: Mr. Trump has a softness actually for Russia and for Mr. Putin. So he does not want to burn his bridges down by having to impose these sanctions. He wants other people to impose sanctions on his behalf and use China, and then weaken that relationship between China and India, so that the United States does not have to burn those bridges, and its policy goals can be achieved. So I think that is where the logic is. And this is the contradictions in Mr. Trump's head, which is complicating the matter.
Exactly. Let's look into the details, if there are any details of substance to look into, because it's very vague. As I said, the media report said the officials are saying we are ready to go. The U.S. officials saying we're ready to go. We're ready to go now, but we're only going to do this if our European partners step up with us. What exactly, Mr. Li Lun, from your reading, what exactly does the White House ask its European counterparts to do? It seems that they're saying, let's do this together, but they're also saying, a second U.S. official said Washington was prepared to mirror any tariffs on China and India imposed by the EU. So the EU will first have to impose tariffs on China and India, and then the U.S. will follow up. Is that what the White House has proposed to its European partners, friends?
Well, from my reading of the news, I think that's definitely the case. So we're seeing the rhetorics or wording like mirror, or U.S. will match whatever tariff that EU is going to propose. So U.S. is definitely not taking the lead on this issue. So I think this, behind all rhetorics and wording aside, I think this is taking EU as a political cover. So basically letting EU to take the first step, and then the US can observe a little bit and see the reaction from China, and then decide whether to follow. Because even if the US mirror whatever action the EU is taking, it could take for example, 30 to 90 days to implement. There could be many delays, or there could be many complications. So I think this is a pretty smart move to let EU take the risk and basically to anger some of its largest trading partners, because China and India are EU's very important trading partners. So EU has a trade deficit of 300 billion euros to China, and also India is a very important exporter of service, especially in terms of business service to EU. So if EU takes such an action and then really impose, like, let's say, a 50 or 100% tariff on these two very important trading partners, then of course, the two relationship between the three parties is going to be greatly damaged, and then the U.S. can observe and see what further actions they can take regarding to China-U.S. relationship, regarding to what further sanctions they're needing to do with Russia. So I think this is a clever move, but I don't think EU is going to really take the bait or buy it. So. But of course, that's we need to see.
Yeah. Remy, what is your reading of what the White House, what the Trump administration exactly want EU to do, and in what sequence? Does the U.S., as the previous guest said, want the EU to step up first this time, rather than taking the lead itself?
So I think there's two main ways to actually analyze that situation. First, on a core belief from the Trump administration, it is that the collective security of Europe should be paid by Europe. The Trump administration has made some moves towards that, in that direction, when requesting that European countries actually increases their GDP spending on defense industry within NATO. It's same thing here in terms of paying the core elements of raising tariffs, because they consider that the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, Russian invasion on Ukraine, is actually a problem for Europe and not specifically for the US. And so that's the core belief, that this issue should be paid off by the US. There's another one which is also very interesting, which is economically. When you look at the impact on tariffs from imports, whether it's imports from India or imports from India or from China, this has a cost on the consumer that actually purchases those goods, the European consumer. It also has a cost if the US relies on this position, which they said they would. It would also have a cost on the American consumer and an impact on the American economy. The latest numbers for the job creation in the US has been quite negative and disappointing. There are signs that indeed inflation has been reduced in the US, but still some signs of a slowing down of the economy. And therefore, the Trump administration would prefer to see the European take the first steps towards raising sanctions and paying economic costs towards this, and then they will follow up. And so that's the idea of not being alone into that conflict, and having a line front from between the European Union and the US. Whether it is in the European best interest, that's another question.
Yeah. Well, again, Remy, I'm going to stay with you. Do you think if this request is true, do you think the European countries would take that risk? Basically, the US is saying, EU, you go and have a tariff war with China, or you launch a tariff war on China and India. Let's not forget, China is the EU's third largest trading partner for goods and services, and its second largest trading partner in goods alone, only after the United States. And the EU is also very important for China, as I said, a second largest trading partner. In terms of India, India has been the 9th largest trading partner of the EU, but its status has been growing rapidly. So, Remy, what will the Europeans do to such a request if it's indeed touted?
It was very interesting to repeat those numbers, because they're interesting to put into context that situation. Here, the answers and the potential future next move from the European Union would be very interesting to monitor. Right now, if the memos are correct, they are analyzing the situation, but they have to take a decision on whether or not to take a stand or have a personal strong position in a question of trade and tariffs. If the EU were to raise tariffs on China and India, obviously, I assume India and China would actually take retaliation about it, and it will really have to be another move from the European to kind of align or accept the decision from the Trump administration, much as what he has done in the past with the decision negotiation between the EU and the US, when the EU agreed to take down a series of industrial tariffs on American imports, while the European exports to the US are actually charged at 15%. This has been seen by many as a poor move and a poor negotiation. It was requested by Germany and Italy specifically, whose industry was worried about higher tariffs when they actually were to export towards the US. But other countries such as France were actually seeing European Union should actually have its own trade policies and not only follow what the Trump administration is taking is suggesting in terms of decisions. So there's going to be this same kind of debate within the European Union. On one side, Germany and Italy that are very much export-minded countries. Others are more in terms of investment or engineering or knowledge or luxury tourism, such as Spain or France, will be much more in terms of the idea of trying to build and continue building the European Union as a second pillar of the Western world and not just aligned towards the Trump administration or American positions.
So it's not probably feasible at all either if implemented. But Mr. Gupta, just now Remy mentioned public opinion towards the trade deal between the US and the European Commission. Let's talk a little bit more on this because this is very interesting. Earlier this year, Donald Trump and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen agreed on a trade deal. And under the deal, the EU is to remove tariffs on all US industrial goods, while most EU goods entering the US will be subject to a 15% baseline tariff. Now, a French polling company did a poll on this, and over half, or 52% of Europeans surveyed, described the deal as a humiliation. And 3 out of 4 respondents said von der Leyen defended European interests very or fairly badly. So how do you look at the reasons as to why so many Europeans think that that deal was already humiliating? And if this kind of sentiment would stand, would be consistent, how would the European public feel about the kind of directions the EU leaders got from White House this time about punishing China and India?
You know, with regard to the tariffs, it's not just in the European Union. Among the other advanced economies which have been hit just as badly by Trump, and I'm talking South Korea and Japan, the sentiment is just as negative. This is an unfairly unbalanced, tilted deal. This is, the EU came in initially with a proposal for zero on industrial tariffs. The EU is going down to 0, but the US is staying at 15, and it's thinking as if it's done a great deal for the EU. It hasn't. The steel and aluminium tariffs continue to be 50% at this point of time, and so it's obviously not a fair deal. On top of that, the EU as an organization, as an institution, is very wedded to multilateral trade processes and law. It considers itself to be a champion of multilateral trade law, and what it is doing is making an agreement with an outlaw country, essentially, which is violating multilateral trade rules. And so the Europeans are saying, why are we getting our hands dirty in the process of trying to satiate a man who's going about doing things, who's basically trying to tear down the multilateral trading order from his end. So this is obviously going down very poorly in EU because of those reasons. And now we have this issue, of course, with regard to these additional 100% which he wants them to do. All it is showing to me, frankly, though, is what are Donald Trump's weaknesses. Donald Trump's weaknesses is he wants to have a good relations with Russia and Putin and let other people do dirty work. A second and a glaring weakness, and I think Chinese audience should know that, Donald Trump does not want to impose that sanction on China because that will tear apart the delicate trade discussions that he's having with China, which could lead to very large market access for Americans in the Chinese market. And so he wants the Europeans to do that. But this then becomes a point of leverage against Donald Trump because we know what his weaknesses are. But your original question, absolutely. There's wide disenchantment, from doorman to minister, with regard to the way the EU and other advanced economies have been forced or compelled and coerced into trying to have some sort of a face-saving agreement with Mr. Trump.
Yeah, Gupta, you are pointing out these things. It's almost ridiculous to the point that it's almost a bit funny. It's as if they think that the world does not see what they're trying to do. Let the EU take the brunt, be at the front line of punishing China and India, and then the U.S. will see and do as it fits. But we all read the news, we all see what's happening, and more importantly, the U.S. is engaged with China in terms of trade negotiations, right? If you want to talk to your partner or rival, is that how you approach the issue? I mean, I'm going to turn to my Chinese guest here, Professor Li Lun, on the part of China. On the one hand, the U.S. is extending its trade truce with China that was negotiated in May between the U.S. and the Chinese negotiator. And now the U.S. is, talking about asking the EU to punish China, and then they are potentially going to a new round of trade negotiation. How can we square these? Can we believe that the U.S. had good faith when it's going into these negotiations with China?
I think part of the reason for pushing the EU to do these policies is to increase their bargaining chip on the table. So basically, the message is that it's not just me that's against you. You see, the whole world, the Europeans are also against.
But nobody's buying that. So, we all see.
Yes, but that's their hope. That's their hope that the Europeans, by putting more sanctions or more tariffs, are siding with the U.S. But I think the Europeans, they are pretty, in a phrase, I think they're stuck between the rock and the hard place, because U.S. EU trade is also accounts for over 40% of global GDP. China is also EU's very important trading partner, so they can't really risk to damage the relationship between either party. So I think Trump is just putting a very difficult situation to EU, and not to mention if EU really puts materialize some of these tariffs. For example, in the past, when you move against Chinese EV exports, China quickly put some countermeasures towards EU's pork and also the luxury products such as handbags and brandy. So if further tariffs is going to be put into place, I think China is definitely going to hit back with more countermeasures. But of course, this is all hypothetical, and I don't think any party want to see that happen because of the Belt and Road Initiative, the China European railway transportation is being built, so it is actually functional right now. So I don't think either party want it to happen, and I don't think EU is going to take that offer from President Trump.
Well, let's hope so, Remy. Let's hope so. But given the current political climate, given the opinion and competency of certain leaders, well, I need to be more objective. It's a general problem these days in the world about competency. But given the kind of political environment, how much of a risk that the EU might try to, cave in to curry favor with the US by taking some leaves, some kind of the steps against China and India. Do you think there is any likelihood at all? Because if the EU says no to the US request, it's also potentially facing some kind of consequence.
So there's obviously different scenarios and there's different objectives. The objectives from the European Union is obviously economically finding a solution that is not too detrimental of its economy in terms of trade and tariffs, whether in terms of relation with the US or China. But there's also the issue of that ongoing conflict in Ukraine with the invasion of Russia that has led to strong economic impact on the European Union, stronger, higher energy costs and others. The one benefiting from that conflict is the US just shipping more energy to the European Union, or others being able to purchase Russian oil at a cheaper price, namely India, China, and other countries. But here, the European Union is suffering for several years of a problem economically and of security. There is a different option in terms of that negotiation when Trump is asking for those 100%. Whether he could either cave, I don't think so. It would be another humiliation. What they can do is try to renegotiate with the Trump administration, saying, "Look, you're asking me to increase my tariffs on India and China. Okay, but then let's renegotiate the terms that we have in terms of us paying 15%, and let's be real allies here in terms of trade allies to solve a security crisis." Or the other one is actually standing by on its own foot, but they will have to and actually find trade agreements with India with China the same way they has done with Canada, or is negotiating right now with the Mercosur. But that means they will have to pay for the time of the defense of the Ukrainian people and the time of the conflict until there's a resolution to the conflict. Everyone would agree that if we can find a resolution to that conflict in Ukraine, that would actually favor the global economy and everyone. But until the Putin administration is weakened to be actually going to the negotiation table, then you will not find an end to that conflict.
It seems still that the logic on the mind of many in this world is that China and India potentially having leverage, having influence over Russia, so they must do something in order to stop the war, but not the other ones who initially started this conflict. Anyway, Mr. Gupta, that is almost a philosophical question, and we're not going to try to change people's mindset on that anytime sooner. But in terms of trade negotiations, late on Tuesday, Trump suggested that the U.S. could in fact boost trade with India, writing an evening social media post that U.S. and India are working to address trade barriers between the nations. He added he was looking forward to speaking with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, but with the idea of asking the EU to impose 100% tariffs potentially on Indian products. Is the U.S. really sincere about improving its relationship with the Indians, about having a good trade relationship with the Indians?
Yes, exactly. It comes down to the issue of insincerity. It comes down to the issue of mixed messaging. The irony is that from the Indian side, they are actually trying to reach out and trying to see ways in which they can, up to a point, satiate Mr. Trump. They won't say so, but I can see India tapering down some of its oil purchases. I think they're trying to make a better market access offer to Mr. Trump, because at the end of the day, I think Mr. Modi has played a wrong hand. He's overplayed his hand. He's overweight in trying to favor the United States. And now, with poor relations generally with many other countries, including with China, he doesn't himself have many options remaining at his hand. So, in spite of the mixed messaging, the Indians too are somewhat in a hole and trying to find better prospects. So that is aiding Trump to some extent. Let me also throw out very quickly two mitigating circumstances why the EU might move a little on this issue. And that is that, the EU put out its 18th sanction package, which is very heavily favored on energy sanctions. And so the US is saying, if you're going to do energy sanctions, here are the sanctions. Why aren't you doing it? And the EU might move, but it will not be tariffs. If it is, it's going to be asset freezes and property blocking and those sort of things, which are much more targeted and specific. The other factor, which is also, I would say, pushing Mr. Trump to some extent, is that right now on Capitol Hill, there is a veto-proof majority for a bill which would have these sort of secondary tariffs imposed. But because it's a Republican leadership, they don't want to get ahead of Mr. Trump. So Mr. Trump himself is volunteering these I think, obnoxious ideas, frankly. But I think there are many of these little drivers also that we must pay attention to. But at the end of the day, I think this 100% secondary tariffs, which are going to be almost certainly found to be illegal even domestically by the Supreme Court, is just it's just unbelievable, the time and age that we're living in.
Yeah, and the Trump administration is literally threatening the Supreme Court, I would say, saying if they ruled against these tariffs or against the Trump administration, it would be a catastrophe for the country. What does that mean? I mean, this is indeed beyond us. Anyway, China will strike back, rest assured, if such a tariff is put in place by whoever against China. Many thanks to my guests, Remy Pierre, Surab Gupta and Li Lun. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Li Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.